JFK International Airport pulsed with movement, a seamless tide of travelers weaving through terminals, dragging designer luggage, sipping overpriced coffee, and checking their watches with impatient flicks of the wrist. Flight announcements crackled overhead, their robotic precision lost in the hum of hurried footsteps and fragmented conversations. Amid the chaos, the entrance to the Horizon Air VIP lounge stood as a gleaming oasis of exclusivity, its frosted glass doors parting only for the privileged few. Ava Sinclair stepped inside, the sharp click of her Louboutin heels slicing through. The hushed atmosphere. The air carried the unmistakable signatures of wealth, imported leather, aged whiskey, fresh orchids. A scent designed to remind those within these walls that they had arrived. She exuded the kind of effortless confidence that turned heads, though not always for the reasons she preferred. Wrapped in a sleek midnight pearl power suit, tailored to perfection, she moved with the quiet authority of a woman accustomed to commanding boardrooms full of men who underestimated her, until they didn't. But here, in this supposed sanctuary of luxury, the shift was immediate. Conversations dimmed ever so slightly. The glances were subtle but unmistakable, flickering toward her like a reflex before darting away. Near the bar, a perfectly groomed couple exchanged whispers, their eyes dragging over her in quiet assessment, questioning. Ava had seen it all before, the double takes, the polite yet distant smiles that never quite reached the eyes, the subtle stiffness of staff as they registered the presence of someone they hadn't expected. She ignored it. She always did, adjusting. The strap of her Hermes Birkin bag, the weight familiar against her wrist, she strode toward the check-in counter. Behind it stood a young lounge attendant, barely in his 20s, his crisp uniform slightly oversized for his wiry frame. His name tag read Ryan. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as Ava approached, a flicker of hesitation flashing across his face before he caught himself. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, forcing a professional smile. "May I see your boarding pass and membership card?" Ava didn't miss the way his eyes flicked briefly toward the glass partitions, where more seasoned employees stood waiting, watching. It was a subtle movement, but it told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't sure she belonged, and he wasn't the only one. Ryan took Ava's membership card with fingers that trembled just enough to betray his uncertainty. He glanced, down at the name embossed in gold, then back at her, the mask of polite customer service slipping for just a second. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, hesitating as if his next move required careful calculation. "I'll just need a moment, ma'am," he said, forcing another smile that failed to mask his discomfort. He turned quickly, disappearing behind the desk, leaving Ava standing alone in the middle of the lounge. She could feel the weight of eyes pressing against her skin, hear the faint shuffle of bodies shifting ever so slightly to get a better look. A few feet away, a man in a tailored grey suit leaned toward his wife, lowering his voice just enough to pretend he wasn't speaking loud enough to be overheard. She probably saved up for a year just to sit here. His wife smirked behind the rim of her champagne flute, giving him a knowing look before returning to her magazine. Ava didn't flinch. The words weren't new, nor was the casual cruelty with which they were delivered. She had long ago learned that wealth alone didn't buy belonging, not in spaces like this, where exclusivity had little to do with money and everything to do with assumptions. The hushed murmur of conversation resumed, though she knew some of it was still about her. Adjusting the cuff of her blazer, she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her shift uncomfortably under their scrutiny. Instead, she let her gaze drift over the room, the plush leather seating, the glass partitions separating private booths, the dim golden lighting designed to exude quiet opulence. A curated sanctuary for those deemed worthy. She was worthy. She also knew it didn't matter. The sharp click of approaching heels broke the moment. A woman in a fitted navy blazer emerged from behind the counter, her movements brisk, efficient, authoritative. Melissa Parker. Ava took her in with a single glance, mid-40s, the kind of woman who carried herself like she had been given a small taste of power and was determined to make everyone beneath her feel it. Melissa stopped in front of Ava, holding her membership card delicately between two manicured fingers, as though it were something that needed to be inspected for authenticity. Her lips curved into a practiced smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Miss Sinclair," she said smoothly, her voice the perfect blend of professionalism and condescension, "are you aware that this is a highly exclusive lounge?" The words were deliberate, slow, measured. Not "this lounge requires membership," not "we need to verify your credentials," but "are you aware?" Ava met Melissa's gaze, seeing the challenge in it, the expectation that she would either apologize for existing in the wrong space or bristle with indignation. She did neither. "Yes," Ava said, her tone even, unbothered. "I am." Melissa hummed, glancing down at the membership card again, as if expecting it to suddenly reveal some hidden flaw that would justify her suspicion. When it didn't, she sighed, her smile tightening. "Well," she said, tapping the edge of the card against her palm, "we've had some recent issues with unauthorized use of these memberships. I'm sure you understand." Ava understood perfectly. The assumption, the scrutiny, the way Melissa's voice carried just enough to ensure that anyone within earshot understood as well. This wasn't about policy. It never was. A slow, deliberate silence stretched between them. A few seats away, a woman pretended to scroll through her phone, but her eyes flickered up every few seconds. A man at the bar stirred his drink, his movements idle, but his focus unmistakable. They were waiting, watching. Ava let them wait. Melissa didn't lower her voice. She didn't turn away to discreetly verify the membership card. Instead, she straightened her posture, shoulders pulled back, chin lifted just slightly, gaze sweeping over the lounge as if preparing an audience for a performance. Then she spoke. Her voice carried with practiced authority, her spine straightened instinctively, her smirk evaporating like mist under the harsh morning sun. Nathan Langley wasn't a man who called for casual check-ins. His voice, clipped edged with something cold, sent a prickle of unease down her spine. "Sir," she said quickly, shifting her stance. "What can I—" "Shut up and listen." The breath caught in her throat. Across the lounge, Ava Sinclair sat poised, her expression unreadable, her fingers idly skimming across her phone screen. She wasn't watching Melissa, wasn't gloating. She didn't need to. Langley exhaled sharply. "In the last 15 minutes, our legal department received notice that Sinclair Holdings has terminated their contract with Horizon Air. Effective immediately." Melissa blinked. That wasn't possible. That contract was worth— "Ava Sinclair," she forced out, her voice wobbling ever so slightly. I wasn't aware she was—" "You weren't aware." Langley's tone was pure venom now. "Melissa, let me make something clear. That woman you humiliated in front of our highest-paying clients, she wasn't just some rich traveler flashing a black card." He paused, as if savoring the next blow. "She was our single largest corporate partner, Sinclair Holdings accounts. And for over 15% of our executive travel revenue, that's tens of millions of dollars, gone, because you decided to play gatekeeper." Melissa's stomach lurched. "Sir, Save it," Langley snapped. "The board has already been briefed. I just got off a call with the CEO, and he is livid. Do you understand what you've done?" Melissa could barely breathe. The weight of the stares around her, the murmurs she had enjoyed minutes ago, now felt suffocating. Her throat was dry. It was just a misunderstanding." "Oh, it was crystal clear," Langley said icily. "Sinclair Holdings cited racial Discrimination by senior staff, do you have any idea what that means? What it looks like for us? I didn't. You didn't think, he interrupted. And now we're bleeding. Our stock is going to take a hit. PR is scrambling, and HR. His voice turned lethal. Expect a call in the next 5 minutes. Clean out your desk, Melissa. You're done. The call ended with a click, sharp and final. Melissa stood there, numb, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling as she lowered the phone. Across the lounge, Ava took a slow sip of her champagne, her expression unreadable. Then, without so much as a glance in Melissa's direction, she rose gracefully, collected her belongings, and strode toward the exit. The hush in the lounge was deafening. No one smirked now. Leonard Carter's fingers tightened around the edge of the podium, knuckles whitening as the questions sliced through his carefully prepared statement. The weight of 100 cameras, 100 pens, scratching against notepads, pressed down on him like a collapsing ceiling. He had prepared for damage control, not for a public execution. The woman who had spoken, Margaret Ellis, a veteran journalist with a reputation for sinking corporate ships, held up her tablet again, the screen glowing with a damning list of past allegations. Horizon Air has a documented history of racial discrimination complaints spanning over a decade, she said, voice like steel wrapped in silk. Lawsuits, settlements, multiple reports from employees and customers alike. So tell us, Mr. Carter, was this really an unacceptable incident, or just the first one that cost you money? A murmur rippled through the press room, the kind that signaled blood in the water. Leonard exhaled slowly, forcing his face into the well-practiced mask of corporate diplomacy. As I've stated, Horizon Air takes these matters very seriously. We are launching a full internal review to ensure. Another voice cut through his sentence like a blade. So seriously, the reporter interrupted, unimpressed, that your company only acted when a billionaire pulled her contracts. The murmurs grew louder. Camera shutters clicked like gunfire. Someone in the back coughed, a sharp, deliberate sound that punctuated the growing discomfort in the room. Leonard's pulse pounded in his ears. His PR team had spent all night crafting the perfect statement, working damage control, ensuring that the words he spoke today would be neutral enough to pacify investors, but apologetic enough to soothe public outrage. And yet, standing here, under the relentless gaze of the press, he felt the slow, creeping realization that none of it was working. Nathan Langley stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, jaw clenched. His expression was unreadable, but the set of his shoulders spoke volumes. He knew this was slipping through their fingers, because this wasn't just a PR scandal anymore. This was a reckoning, and the woman responsible for it was nowhere near. This room, Ava Sinclair, sat in the penthouse suite of a 5-star hotel, her silhouette framed against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The television across the room played the press conference on a muted loop, but she wasn't watching. She had already predicted every word, every desperate attempt at damage control. Her phone screen lit up with notifications, apology emails, carefully worded statements from executives scrambling to distance themselves from the fallout. A message from a well-known PR firm offering their services to help reshape the narrative. She scrolled past them all, unmoved. Horizon Air was burning, and for the first time, they were learning what it meant to answer to someone they had underestimated. With quiet precision, she opened her social media app, fingers moving across the keyboard with the same calculated intent she used in boardrooms. When power bends only to wealth, it was never justice, just self-preservation. Do better. She hit send. The reaction was instantaneous. Within seconds, the post exploded. Likes, retweets, comments pouring in by the thousands. Screenshots spread like wildfire. The phrase, just self-preservation, began trending worldwide, dissected by analysts, quoted in think pieces. Ava placed her phone face down on the table, her expression unreadable as she reached for the glass of whiskey beside her. She didn't need to see what happened next. She already knew. Horizon Air's stock was plummeting. Their crisis team would work overtime, scrambling to issue another round of apologies, another promise of reform. Investors would demand explanations. The CEO would be forced to make a statement, and Melissa Parker. She was already forgotten. Ava took a slow sip of her drink, savoring the burn as the world outside her window kept turning. She let the moment stretch, the weight of her words pressing into the silence. The crowd, still riding the high of the thunderous. Applause hushed in anticipation. Ava tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable yet utterly commanding. "Now I want to ask you something," she repeated, her voice calm but charged with purpose. She let her gaze travel across the room, past the executives who had once turned a blind eye, past the employees who had suffered in silence, past the people who had fought, lost, and risen again. She saw them all. "When the next injustice happens, because it will happen, what will you do?" A murmur rippled through the audience, an unease that spoke of deep introspection. "You've seen what happens when we stand up, when we refuse to be silent," Ava continued, her voice steady, unwavering. "But real change isn't about one woman, one company, or even one movement. It's about all of us. It's about what we do when the cameras aren't rolling, when no one is watching, when it's easier to look away." She took a step forward, her presence magnetic, her words pulling them in. "When the next company chooses profit over people, when the next boardroom decides that diversity is just a branding strategy, when the next person in power thinks they can get away with erasing our voices, will you speak?" The room was still, breathless. Ava's voice dropped lower, quieter, but somehow even more powerful. "Because silence isn't neutrality. Silence is complicity." A charge crackled through the air, undeniable, electric. A woman in the front row wiped at her eyes. A young black man near the back, wearing an ID badge from a major airline, straightened his shoulders like he was finally seeing his place in the world with clarity. A CEO shifted in his seat, suddenly feeling the weight of every decision he'd ever made. Ava let the tension build, then released it with a single, final statement. "Change isn't coming," she said. "It's already here. And you get to decide. Will you be the one who stands or the one who stays silent?" The crowd erupted, not just applause, not just cheers. It was something deeper, raw, unfiltered energy, a rallying cry, a declaration, a movement. Ava stepped back, allowing the moment to breathe, to grow, to take on a life of its own. She had set the fire. Now she was watching the world burn away everything that had held them back. Ava stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with quiet intensity. "Have you ever faced a moment like this?" The energy in the room shifted, subtle but undeniable. A moment where you knew you were being judged for something that had nothing to do with your ability, your success, or your worth. Where someone decided, without ever knowing you, that you didn't belong. The room was silent, but Ava saw it. The slight nods, the way shoulders tensed, the way people sat a little straighter, as if they had just been hit with a memory they had buried long ago. "What did you do?" she asked, letting the words settle like an ache. "What would you have done in my place?" She let the question linger, not because she expected an answer, but because she wanted them to feel it, to sit in the discomfort, to recognize the weight of it. Then she gave them the only truth that mattered. "Injustice isn't just about what happens," she said, voice unwavering. "It's about how we fight back." And with that she stepped away from the podium. The crowd didn't just applaud, they rose as one. The room erupted, voices cheering, hands clapping, the sound rolling like thunder. But Ava wasn't just hearing applause, she was hearing momentum. She descended the stage, the force of the moment still crackling in the air. But the shift wasn't just in the room. It was happening out there, beyond these walls, out in the world. This wasn't just a speech. It was a reckoning. Her phone vibrated in her palm, a flood of messages pouring in. CEOs scrambling to rewrite their corporate policies, activists rallying under the banner of the Equity Initiative, everyday people sharing their own stories of discrimination, resilience, and the fight to be seen. Ava glanced toward the exit. A group of young women, Black, Latina, Asian, stood. Their eyes were bright, shining with something deeper than admiration. Hope. She didn't need to ask what they were thinking. She already knew. She gave them a nod, a silent promise. This isn't over, because neither was she. And if you're watching this, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, told you didn't belong, then don't let this conversation end here. Like, share, subscribe. Because when we stand together, when we refuse to be silent, we don't just fight back, we win.